All right. And feel free throughout to ask questions. You can mute or unmute as you wish. It's not a huge group, but you know, if there's a lot of background sound or something, you want to mute it, but if there's not a lot of background sound, it's not interfering, that's fine. And you can pop in and ask questions verbally if you like, or I've got the chat box open on my screen as well. So feel free to pop a question on chat if that works better for you. But welcome. And basically the goal tonight is to just kind of talk about some new resources and ideas, and some changes, I hope, to improve the Head Start program, and just kind of do another kind of basic refresher about training concepts, which some of you have probably heard me say plenty of times before, but hopefully there's always something new to take away. And this kind of came about, I think, you know, before COVID, just talking to a few of the Head Start volunteers here and there about the need for just, you know, continue to have ways to touch base and kind of update what we're doing and keep giving you guys ways to keep your skills kind of refreshed and everything. Especially since so many people have been in the program for varying amounts of time and things have kind of changed and grown and evolved as Head Start's been around longer. So hopefully, we'd been kind of talking about doing this before COVID with Tawn, and then, you know, that all happened. But we thought, well, before we started up again, maybe this is a good time to take advantage of the situation and kind of start out fresh with everyone. And the nice thing we've discovered about Zoom chats is that it enables us to, you know, record it and let it be available to everybody afterwards, so we don't have the problem of, you know, doing one in-person thing, and if someone misses it, the next one might not be for a few months. So as I said, the purposes of today's training is, you know, we have over the last few months thought about ways to hopefully kind of change and improve the program, you know, for you guys, for the dogs, for everybody. Hopefully, I hope the changes you'll agree are for the better, and I'm always glad to hear feedback. Nothing wild, no wild departures, but just a few more options to give you guys some flexibility. And so we'll kind of just discuss that and the goals of the Head Start program again, and talk about a refresher on training skills and exercises. Does anyone have questions before I get started? All right. So the big new change that we are talking about doing or planning to do is a little bit of a change to the structure of the teams and who we put on a Head Start team, as far as what dogs we put on a Head Start team. And we'll talk about kind of why we're making these changes and how we see it working. So we're going to start, when we start back up, we'll still have the junior and senior team as before, and people with designated days, you know, regulars and alternates. But our regular teams are only going to have 3 dogs assigned to them, not 4. And any dog that is included on a team will be a dog that's housed in front of house. So they will be dogs that are available for adoption and housed in the adoptable section. That doesn't mean that you can't work with back of house dogs, and we'll talk about that. But if for some reason we do have to move a dog off of the floor and into back of house, maybe they're not doing well on the floor, maybe their behavior is escalating, maybe they're in bite quarantine, then we will remove them from a regular spot on a team. But again, that doesn't mean that you can't still interact with those dogs and work with those dogs and do Head Start with them. Back house dogs still might be designated as Head Start okay. So I think you guys kind of know that's sort of our next level. You know, we have Blue Dot, we have holding walkers, but even then in holding, we have some dogs that are staff and Head Start only. So that will still exist. And since you will have less dogs on your team to work within the 2 hours, you, in theory, should have an extra 20, 30 minutes, and then you can choose what you want to do with that extra time. You can choose to walk around the kennel areas and just work with all the dogs, working on click to quiet, you know, rewarding for quiet behavior, calm behavior, sitting, you know, desirable kennel presentation, in adoptables, in holding, wherever you'd like. you can choose to spend that extra time with one of the dogs that's on your team. If you felt like, you know, you've got a favorite or one that you really just think needs that extra enrichment, that extra attention and time, you can spend longer than your usual 20-30 minutes with that individual dog. You could go on over to, you could do Headstart work with another dog in adoptables that you think, you know, they're not on a team, but maybe they just got moved over and you think they could benefit from a little bit of work. Or you can walk on over to back of house, go over to holding, and look to see if there are any, you know, staff and Headstart OK dogs back there that you want to work with. And you can take them out and work with them. You can't eat my glove, buddy. So as I said, just because we moved a dog to back of house and we've taken them off a regular spot of the team, you're absolutely welcome to work with them during your Headstart shift or any holding shift that you come in for, unless, of course, they've been made staff only for some reason. But if you prefer to stick to the front of house dogs that are up for adoption or in adoptables, you can choose to do that. And the reason we're making this change is, you know, we realize that the back of house dogs are often going to be the most challenging ones with the more problematic, concerning behaviors. And their outcomes might be less certain by the time they end up in back of house, because we're kind of getting concerned about some of the behaviors we're seeing. So we wanted to give you guys the option. I know some people enjoy working with the hardest dogs, and I know that some people would rather work with dogs that maybe aren't as physically and emotionally challenging to deal with. So we thought that, you know, kind of keeping you physically safe, emotionally safe, trying to prevent burnout and make this still a very rewarding experience for you volunteers that you will want to continue to do. We thought that this, giving you guys the choice, might help address some of these challenges, because I know that it's very, very hard when your team gets made up of dogs that are extremely difficult to walk and giving you a lot of challenging behaviors, and we're asking you to come in and spend 2 hours doing that. And it can feel discouraging if those are the dogs that are the most marginal, and certainly they absolutely need the help and the attention and all of that Headstart can provide. And so we want to be able to still provide that. But if you guys need a break from it, if you want to stick to your more run-of-the-mill kind of adolescent dog that's unruly and needs some manners, and the more fearful one that just needs to build some confidence, it's over in adoptables, that's cool too. I think everybody has their skills and their preferences and the things they find rewarding, and sometimes you just need, you know, a little bit of a break. So I hope that people like that change. I hope it, you know, helps address concerns, hope we can prevent burnout and still give you, if you want, the opportunity to work with those challenging dogs, knowing the risks and the challenges. It gives you the ability to continue to do that too, and have those dogs continue to benefit from all the good stuff Headstart can do. So I'm curious, you know, how do people feel about that? Does that make sense? Sound good to people? Seem like a reasonable way of handling some of these challenges we've had with the tough back house dogs?
I'm a little bit confused. You said you would still label some back of the house dogs for Headstart, but they wouldn't. But you're saying they would not be in the book, like on the on the list.
Wouldn't be like on the list, like we expect, you know.
This is your team's dogs.
Yeah, like
okay.
There will be other dogs over there that, you know, are kind of optional. If you want to go work with one of them or more of them, you're welcome to, but we want to give people kind of that choice. If the back of the house dogs that are kind of
so they're like extra.
Yeah, and so we are reducing the size of the team by one dog so that you can use that kind of flexibility. Like, what do I want to do? Is there a dog over and holding, a back house dog that I want to take out and walk? Or do I want to spend extra time in front of house? Do I want to walk up and down the kennels? Just working with every dog on calm kennel presentation. Give you guys some more just flexibility of how to use that extra time. And, you know, on different days it may vary. Maybe one day you're like, I'm up to a jumpy bitey dog over and holding, or you know what, I'm kind of tired and I just want to walk up and down and reward dogs who are being calm and quiet at the front of their kennels. So there will still be over and holding. One of the cage cards that you will often see on some of them will say staff or Headstart only. So that, you know, it's kind of a level up from just the regular holding walkers, the regular blue dot holding walkers. So if you see those on a kennel, that's probably a good dog that could benefit from some Headstart, and they're going to have limited walkers who can handle them. So, you know, if a Headstart walker wants to take them out, awesome. But again, just totally optional. We're not putting them on a team saying you guys are expected to work with that dog. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Will they have notes too? Or how would we know what to do with them? Or what not to do?
Yeah. I have thought about that, and maybe Teresa and I can talk about that. And Teresa, I know if you have any thoughts right now, you want to chime in. But I think we can still put something in the binder for you guys. Maybe it'll just be in the regular, you know, holding dog walking binder, a Headstart sheet, because regular walkers shouldn't be looking at that dog anyway, you know, because they're not walking them over their Headstart only. So I'm assuming we can probably just keep the same log in their regular tracking sheet on the walker notebook. Does that?
Yeah, I think this is a good plan. Me personally, I don't know what other people think, but sometimes those dogs do have little idiosyncrasies that you need to know about ahead of time.
Yeah.
So if there was just some way that we could just know what we're getting into.
Oh, absolutely. And I'm going to talk about our new tracking form in a second too.
Okay.
So that might help too. And I'm thinking what we'll do is probably just include that tracking form in their binder in back of house. So yeah, before you walk on into the kennel, you'll have some idea of what to do or not do with that individual.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Angela?
I'm sorry?
So can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, she's stopped. Angela, what would happen with, you know, the dogs that formerly in holding that would have been a Head Start candidate? Will they get more attention with the behavior programs that staff does, or?
Yeah, so we have, sorry, my puppy is wanting to eat my computer cord. Even though he's got lots of things to do. Yeah, we're not gonna let them just be neglected. I mean, again, we're kind of assuming that plenty of Head Start people will, on their holding shifts or the Head Start shifts, want to come over and give those dogs attention. We also, you know, Teresa and I work with the dogs that are kind of behaviorally needing some more help, and we also are back of house staff. Pay extra attention to those dogs, and we have, if you've seen the behavior intervention cards that are kind of orange on the kennels back there in holding, we have a back of house kind of floating position most days that part of their job is to spend a few hours doing behavior interventions with the dogs, kind of as directed by the behavior team. So every day, Teresa and I put together a little checklist of which dogs in back house or front of house need extra help from that floating back house role that day. And then they spend a few hours going and giving that extra training, extra enrichment to those dogs. So we're certainly not neglecting them. They're certainly going to get behavior interventions and help from the behavior team, from back of house, and I assume from Head Start. But we want to give volunteers the option to say, like, you know, I just know that some of those teams back last winter got probably really, really challenging for some of you guys. We had some combinations of dogs that were really tough, and a lot of you love that and want to work with those dogs, and I want you to continue to have the opportunity to do that. And I also want to respect if that's, you need a break from that and want to work with dogs that need some training, some manners, some more basic issues, but aren't getting quite as marginal as far as their behavior. Does that help?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Yep.
Angela?
Yeah.
I'm just curious. You said that it should free up some time by having 3 dogs on a team.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm just slow, but when I had the 4 dogs, I was there for usually about 3 hours. So maybe I spent too much time with each dog, but I don't think it would, at least for me, well, I'm switching to alternate, but at least for me, it wouldn't have allowed me to work with an extra dog, you know,
Okay.
like you said. So I don't know, maybe is that too much time to spend on 4 dogs? Was 3 hours too long?
I mean, I think originally we thought of it as you guys would probably be spending total roughly a half hour with each dog, if there were 4 dogs on a team and it was a 2-hour shift. And I know that kind of you're balancing the time that takes just to get them out and get your supplies and go write the notes and everything too. So it probably equates
Right.
20 minutes with an individual dog. You know, I mean, if you think, I think it depends.
Yeah.
You know, I think some of these guys actually benefit from kind of short and sweet. Get
Mm-hmm.
them outings that they can be successful the whole time and it's good and beneficial, but doesn't allow them the opportunity to start to get too over aroused or too overstimulated or stressed or frustrated. I mean, some of these guys might benefit from shorter sessions.
Okay.
Certainly some of them benefit from getting off site and walking down Cherry Hill Road and decompressing a little bit. So I don't want to discourage you guys from doing that. I don't know, what have other people been doing, or what's your experience been? Has 4 been too many for 2 hours, or?
I think it really depends on what dogs are on your team.
Yeah.
And I'm relatively new to this, but sometimes 4 felt like too many and other times 4 was just perfect. So I'm all in agreement with going to 3 because, you know, you can still work with other dogs and it just allows you a little bit more flexibility. I'm happy with that.
Yeah, I found that 4 always took me more than 2 hours. By the time I got the supplies, really read the notes, left good notes, it usually took me more like 3 hours.
Oh, wow.
So 3 dogs makes more sense to me.
Right, I agree.
And, you know, again, I don't think, and I, you know, don't want to speak for Teresa, so feel free to chime in if you can, Teresa. But I guess I also wouldn't care if you guys have done 2 dogs and you're running up against that 2 hours and you know there's a dog that you're concerned about over and holding, or you would like to work with and holding, or you think needs that extra attention maybe more than that 3rd dog on your regular team does, that maybe that other dog on the regular team has had 5 Head Start sessions that week already. If you want to say, hey, you know what, I'm gonna go over and take out that back house dog that I think really needs extra work, I'm not averse to that either. I want it to be rewarding and reinforcing to you guys. I want it to be benefiting the dogs. So I think giving it some flexibility is totally fine.
Yeah, can you hear me as well?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, I was like, that sounds good, because we could always supplement, you know, with our time or with that cost for too,
Yeah.
if we, you know, notice somebody's not getting worked with or business today, we can always supplement with our enrichment or, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. You can use your judgment if you look at the notes and you're like, somebody's had a zillion Head Start sessions, doing fine and maintaining, and they're over in front of the house and you think somebody else needs it, cool. You know, if you see a dog that's on your team that nobody's taken out for a week or something, though, I mean, maybe stick to them. But I think you guys can kind of use your discretion of who you think needs it the most. You all have been doing it a while and know the dogs well. All right. Well, let's know how it feels as you kind of come back and are working with this new format. If you're liking it, if you're not, I mean, really, this was kind of motivated out of just, you know, concern for what a hard task you guys have. And I want this to be rewarding and beneficial for everyone, dogs and you. and I don't want to burn out our really valued Head Start teams if we're having just challenging dogs and it starts to get no fun for you. Again, I know lots of people, you're in this because you love the challenging dogs, but if that gets hard, we can, give you some dogs that are probably still challenging, but maybe not quite as extreme either. And if you like the extremes, you're welcome to keep doing it. So the other kind of new things that will be available for you guys, I have been working for the last few weeks on a Head Start kind of resource manual, and I wanted to put together essentially an electronic resource that you guys could have. I know we have in the Head Start binders, there's printouts of some exercises and tips and stuff, which are all great information, but I also, I'm hearing you guys talk about it takes 3 hours just to get through a shift. I'm sure you're not having that extra time to sit down in the dog walker station and read through all that. So it's not necessarily the most convenient format all the time. Maybe it's easy to kind of flip back and remind yourself or get an idea, but wanted something that you guys could maybe have more easily accessible to you. So I've put together a training manual, and it's in PDF. We'll be able to get you an electronic version of that. I mean, I think it's pretty much done unless there's some hoops sign-offs I'm not aware of. I think Ton can probably distribute that or put it up maybe as soon as tomorrow. I don't know, but probably very soon. And I can show it to you now on my screen, but it will have both written information and links to related videos of some of the exercises so that you can have, more interactive and more diverse kind of training opportunities. And I've included sections, just kind of basics of how animals learn, some exercises to practice your training mechanics and timing without animals, descriptions of basic training exercises that might be useful things to do with some of our Head Start dogs. And then I've got a chapter on ideas for working through activity and ideas for working with fear, more in the kind of fearful, avoidant, withdrawn type. So why don't I just pull up that on my screen so you guys can get a quick look of what it looks like. All right, are you guys seeing the manual now?
Yep.
Okay. So you guys know me, so you realize it's long because I just kept throwing things in there. Don't feel like you need to sit down and read this from cover to cover. I want it to really be like a resource that's accessible to you. And so if like, okay, we've just put a dog on your team that is reactive on leash and you want a reminder of ways to work with that, exercises to practice, you want to watch some videos of it, you can go to the reactivity chapter and refresh yourself on what those skills are, or with fear or whatever. In most cases, I've tried to have written descriptions and video links. So depending on what kind of learner you are, hopefully that'll be helpful, giving you just, some more diversity to help you learn more. And don't be overwhelmed by the length of it. You guys are totally familiar that I don't, that I can throw lots of information at people if they want to hear it. So I hope that will be useful. And along with that, we've revised the tracking form to give a section for the behavior staff when we put a dog in the team to kind of give some guidance about what might be good areas or exercises to work on. And some other space for like recording things like, what the dog's favorite reinforcers were, etc. So I'll pull that up on my screen as well so you guys can get a little preview of it. All right. So kind of similar, you know, previously Teresa or I would usually try to type up a little blurb about the dog. Just gonna look a little more formal now, but we'll have the information on who the dog is, where they are. This section will be for Teresa or myself to kind of give you a little background on the dog, why they're in Head Start, what they might need help with. We can write if there are specific areas or exercises we'd like you to focus on, and often we'll try to refer back to things in that manual. So we say, you know, this dog is kind of fearful and avoidant. Be good to flip through, watch some of those videos on working with fear and stress if you're about to work with that dog. If we know the dog hates hot dogs but loves cheese, we'll write that down for you. But feel free to add to that as well if you guys, as you're working with the dog, figure out something that your dog goes crazy for, you know, share that with your fellow Head Starters. And then this looks kind of similar. You record the date and time, who you are. If you want to write the specific kind of cues or exercises you worked on, like, okay, we worked on, you know, engage, disengage, or find it, you can make a little note of that. And then just any more detailed notes on the side. So pretty similar, but trying to get all that information more on one place rather than just looking for the printout at the front. Any thoughts or questions about those two new additions?
Is there any thought about maybe making this like a shared Google form or something like that that can be entered electronically?
Yeah, so then you guys don't have to sit there in the dog walking station and write it?
Yeah. And you don't have to try and translate our handwriting.
That's not a bad idea.
We'd have to figure out a way to print it out.
Or have easy access to it. Yeah.
Yeah, but with COVID and everything, that's a really good idea. That's one thing I've been worrying about, is sitting there documenting for, 15, 20 minutes. Just, you don't want to be inside as much as you can.
Yeah. I think what we'd have to troubleshoot is how if there are people who that's not convenient for, who don't want to go home and type on the computer.
Right.
Get it all together in one place.
Yeah, I don't think I would remember as well if I didn't do it right then.
Yeah, that's true.
I would miss details. And plus, after you've worked on 3 dogs, you're confused. Well, which one bit me? Well, you're not confused about that. Which one jumped on me? Which one, jumped on me 5 times. Yeah. I wouldn't be very good doing it at home after.
Right.
They, years ago, well, before you got here, they talked about, those little, like in the hallways in the dog walker station. I mean, not the dog walker station, in the adoptables area, where they have like those little computer stations in the wall.
Mm-hmm.
Years ago, we requested that we be able to go into that and do these notes like that on the computer. This was a long time ago. And I guess it was discussed, but they didn't want to give us access to it or something. But I don't know if they still have computers there or not, but there used to be.
Yeah, I remember that. I don't know what has happened. That's come up a few times, not just, in recent conversations with staff as well, because, back of house staff, front of house staff could use that capability as well as you guys. So I don't know. Do you know, are those still around, Teresa? Do you know?
I think so, 'cause, I mean, I used to use those when I worked on front of house, and like to enter, notes and stuff into HuntPoint.
Right.
I think they're still there. We can look tomorrow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because this is that would kind of get you out of that small room where everybody's breathing that air. And also, if I don't really see the staff using it that much anymore either. So, but I know they used to.
Yeah, I remember they used to when I was a volunteer, but I haven't even seen them.
Right. Well, anyway, that would be, I'd rather do something like that if possible, rather than, I'm okay with a computer, but I wouldn't remember it going home.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I think you're right. I think we would lose detail because
Yeah.
That is a good point. Yeah, but it would yeah it would be nice to have that option.
Mm-hmm. Ask them again.
Yeah.
This was a long time ago.
Yeah.
When they said no.
then it was conversations about getting some more accessibility for just other, staff as well. So we don't have to search for a computer somewhere in the building when we're trying to make notes. So yeah, we'll make a note to kind of look at that. That's good ideas, good thoughts.
Is one of the things I was wondering in that form that you just showed us, would we be able to know any history on the dog, like if it was returned? We deal with that a lot, it seems like, or if just any of these extenuating circumstances that sometimes come into play that we don't always know about.
We've got that section up there for the for Tress and I to make comments, and so I think that's stuff that we would generally include if it was relevant. If the dog was returned because someone moved, I don't know if that's the most interesting thing, but if they were returned because they are reactive on leash and pulled their owner over, and that could be details that we could share with you, because that's going to signal that we probably need to work on leash reactivity for this dog. But I think that's where that information would come from.
I found over time doing this that any little clues that we can use to piece together what to do or what to look out for is helpful. Just anything, as much information as we can get.
It kind of leads nicely into what I was going to talk about next, kind of along the lines of that form, is so certainly a lot of that information can come from the staff, the behavior team, as far as what we're giving you a background of the dog or what you should know, make your jobs easier and have more successful sessions. And that information gathering is certainly always an ongoing process. So the more you guys are working with the dogs, the more we're learning about them, the more we're learning about them in the shelter environment. So that's why it's so helpful for you guys, for each other, and to us as the behavior team, to get your feedback as well about what you're learning about the dog as you work with them. And given that, I want to talk about the importance of just thinking about how we're making memos and the importance of objectivity. So thinking about a subjective memo would be one that's using a lot of adjectives or labels, things like friendly, playful, nice, fearful, etc. If you find yourself trying to get inside the animal's head, assign meaning to what they're doing, and trying to kind of hypothesize what they're thinking, what they're feeling, what their thoughts are in the scenario. Obviously, all those things are going to be subjective. They're your own kind of interpretation. We really need the best source of information for you guys to be communicating with each other and us are going to be things that are objective. So descriptions of body language and behavior, descriptions that if multiple people were watching it, they would describe the same thing or similar. And it's thinking about what is observable, not trying to guess at some kind of internal state of the animal. And the reason this is important is, labels don't tell us what is actually happening. I have just today heard descriptions of dogs being attacked, which varied wildly whether you would consider that an attack or not. And so, sometimes what one person describes as, aggressive, reactive might look a lot fearful, might look a lot different to someone else watching it. And that can be pretty serious. We want to know exactly what's happening. So labels aren't telling us what exactly is happening. And, as much as we can learn about dogs and good at reading them and reading their body language and kind of understand what we think is likely going on, the reality is that none of us ever actually knows what's going on internally for another individual. Other people can have different interpretations, and emotions can present in different ways. So the objective language really gives us the best information for tracking, for monitoring, to see if there's improvement or decline, and planning behavior and knowing what's working or what's not, knowing the context that things are happening, the function it's serving, why the animal, what the outcome is that the animal's doing the behavior for. So it really helps us a lot more in doing our jobs and kind of measuring the success of how things are going in the program. So just a few kind of examples of subjective versus objective examples. So this first quote, this would be an example of a subjective memo. Fido and my belly rubs are so cute. I need to move stuff so I can actually read this. He's so sweet. So, that could have looked a couple of different ways. It might have looked like this. We went to the play yard. I sat down on the bench. He was sitting in front of me, facing away. I reached over to pet him. He laid down, rolled over on his side, lifted his flank, showed me his belly, and laid in this position while I pet him with his ears back and his mouth closed. That probably means something quite different than I sat on the bench. He ran over, bumped my hand for some head pets, rolled fully on his back, all four legs extended, writhing on the grass with an open mouth and squinty eyes. So hopefully you guys can see that those are probably two different things. But from maybe someone who's not using objective language and is not sure of how to interpret things, we could get kind of so even if a person doesn't necessarily know how to interpret what's going on in scenario one here, which I would describe as more of an appeasement, tapping out kind of behavior, even if they're not labeling it as such, if they describe what they're seeing, I can read this and go, oh, actually, maybe something else was going on with that dog.
That would take a lot more space on the form, I think, to write all that out. I mean, I think it's a good idea, but
Yeah.
it looked, I don't know, I'm not really seeing the form at the right size, of course, but it seemed like the box was kind of small to write all this in.
Okay. We can always do
Maybe,
that too. If we do find like, I was just.
or make it like a horizontal paper, where you have more room to write.
Yeah, do like a landscape portrait.
Yeah, landscape, yeah.
Okay, yeah, we can play around with that. That's all easy to fix.
Because I see the difference and it's a really good point.
That's just an example. Time. Yeah. And so finally, just kind of want to talk about, I think you guys all are aware of this, but our main goal with Headstart is that it's a training and enrichment program. Really, the goals are to provide mental stimulation, hopefully teach them skills to increase adaptability, and to just maintain overall behavioral health. And so, over the years, we've been moving and hope to continue to move in less of a cookie cutter approach. I mean, I remember when I was doing Headstart when it first came out, it was great, and it's a new program and learning kind of how to do this best. But I think the focus was much more like we're going to have sets of same sets of cues. We're going to work on them with all the dogs. They're nice behaviors to learn, but maybe not necessarily the most important thing that dog necessarily needs for their behavioral health. So rather than just thinking about we're going to teach them these 4 cues, and once they master it, we're moving on to the next 4 cues. Instead, I really want people to be targeting the training sessions based on the dog in front of them and that individual dog's needs. And again, we'll help you identify and know what this dog particularly needs through communication on that form and with you guys. And think much more about like behavioral health and life skills. I'm not as worried about whether they learn verbal cues. It's awesome if the public can say sit to the dog and they actually do put their butt on the ground. People are amazed and awed and think the dog's the most brilliant thing in the world. That's great. But I'm more concerned about, does the dog present well at the front of their kennel? Than do they sit on cue? Does the dog have other outlets that are keeping them enriched and behaviorally healthy, so they're not pacing or wall jumping or compulsively licking the side of the wall? So I think continuing to encourage you guys to have that flexibility and work where each dog's at, and not get hung up on if they know shake or down or roll over or anything. And for some dogs, maybe teaching all those cute tricks is the thing to do. That is a form of mental enrichment and stimulation, and it's appealing to the public. And absolutely, I've included in the manual tips for training some of these things. But work with where the dog's at. If the dog is profoundly fearful and needs help just accepting being leashed up, that's going to be the goal, not teaching them cute tricks. All right. So that's sort of my kind of intro to the stuff that we're trying to roll out or do a little different or add as far as resources. So I was going to move into kind of just a refresher of what I kind of tend to call the science and the art of how animals learn. Again, a lot of you probably have heard this, seen pieces of it, but parts, but hopefully we can go through it again. And I hear all this stuff all the time too, but I think it's always good to kind of revisit and think about, maybe give you some more ideas. But before I get into that, any other questions about what I covered in that first half?
I have a question. Maybe you're going to cover this later, but about just the scheduling of the volunteers. Is that the same, or would that change? Are you still wanting one person per day per team, or is that changing?
I don't think that's changing.
Okay.
No, that's still a plan. Yeah.
So then I guess I would follow that up by asking, how is there a way that we are going to try to get the right number of people on the teams, or get enough people on the teams when we start back up, to make sure we have enough people to be effective?
I mean, that's probably a ton question. I know she's been kind of reviewing who all is an active Head Start person, who the regulars and alternates are. I think we're assuming it would be the same schedule unless, people's availabilities and lives or anything have changed. So I'm sure that Ton will be kind of checking in with people, seeing if they still want the regular spot, regular day, same team, if that's still working. We still have a list of alternates too. We can reach out to see if someone wants a regular spot, if somebody's circumstances have changed, or they don't want to come back and be at the shelter now during the pandemic. So I'm sure that there'll be a little bit of shuffling and revisiting and checking in with people. But, I know that Ton has said a lot of people have been eager to come back and start Head Start up, and some people already stepped forward and said they'd like a regular spot if one's available. So I hope that we can get those teams started up and filled.
Okay.
It would be nice to see the schedule and see who's this final schedule from Ton, because I'm an alternate, but like right now, there's actually a lot of extra time, because there's less shifts in the shelter and sometimes less animals.
Oh yeah.
Like if I'm there every Thursday doing IOQ, it'd be nice to know, what else, because I've been looking, well, what else could I do if I run out of, sometimes there's only a few animals back there.
Yeah.
It'd be nice to get the Head Start back up and know, what's available, and that to start working with those dogs again for something extra to do.
Yep.
Yeah. So you're saying, yeah, that's more Ton's area, is getting everybody organized.
Yeah.
Because I guess, I'll tell you, but I was going to tell her, it's that she hasn't really been keeping the list. Anastasia was keeping it, and of who's on what day.
Mhm.
And maybe Tawn could start keeping it instead, because she's more like, she's got access to the computer system to see whenever who's active and who isn't, and who wants to change. And I would make that suggestion, is maybe she could keep the list.
Okay.
And send out the list to us.
Okay. Yeah.
Going forward, because especially now, since everything has changed with COVID and everything has happened, and we weren't even at the shelter for so long, but she was still working, so she should probably just manage the list.
I wonder if there's an easier way to manage the communication too, because I know we just had this like massive distribution list, but if that could be, I always thought, why don't we have a group, on one of these
Well,
services?
it changed so much. It
Yeah.
was always changing. People are always dropping out or adding in or becoming alternates, or
And so I think that would argue that a group would
yeah.
be a better way of managing that, because then you would just need a administrator who, when someone left the program, could take them out. Because I've always worried about
Mhm.
the communication. If someone's just looking for the last Head Start distribution email and just
Mhm.
that, you could be getting people that haven't been in Head Start for
That's
ever.
right. That's why I'm saying she should keep it, because she's got the computer to see who's logging in on these shifts and who isn't, and
Yeah.
and she keeps track of all the other categories.
Yeah.
That's my opinion. I haven't talked to her lately because I haven't been there, but
Yeah, we can brainstorm with her as far as
Hmm.
making sure those lists are current. I know she's talked about wanting to do that just anyway, making sure that everyone who's still listed in Head Start wants to be on it, has been somewhat active, at least
Mhm.
pre-COVID. And then I think it would be worth thinking if there's a better way of managing communication so that people don't get accidentally left off a distribution, or included when they are no longer active or something like that. And so you don't search through.
Yeah, the last time I asked her about it, she did fix last year some people thought they had to be in Head Start to do pack hike, and she separated that. So she fixed that. So Head Start is only Head Start. And then she was talking about possibly taking, like, just automatically dropping someone off Head Start if they'd been inactive she was trying to figure out what would be a good time, 3 months, 6 months.
Yeah.
Because like Lisa's talking about, you list a whole bunch of alternates, but a lot of them, like, weren't really active.
Right.
Like they
At
said,
one point, yeah, there was like 13 of them or something at one point,
Yeah.
and then that's
Yeah.
so she was talking about doing something like that.
Yeah. No, I think
Mhm.
we've revisited that too. I think right at the exact moment there might be some issue with being able to run those reports, because we've sort of suspended inactive reporting because of COVID. We're giving people some credit, but as things roll back up, I think we're going to look at those and figure out who actually is active and who's not. And
Yeah, and she can send out the email list, because we do email each other if we're going on vacation and we want somebody to cover our day. So that's still a need. That's how we do it, just through this informal list that Anastasia was keeping. So
that would be better replaced in a group.
Mhm.
Again, because I worry we were just searching through our email to find the last message.
Right. Yeah.
And the other thing that I thought might be helpful is with like organizing like groups or something electronically is, I mean, you can communicate pretty well with your notes and everything, but there's sometimes like, somebody is on, I'm on Tuesday senior team, and you have a certain experience, you want to share it like actually with somebody, you can like, text them or group chat or whatever and say, hey, this is really what happened. I wrote a long note about it, but I really, I'd like to communicate to you in person how it went and what I think you should do or whatever, what you should try, what didn't work.
And I think just in general, for exactly those kind of reasons, Emily, and for us as the behavior team, the manual that I'm giving you is hopefully a start or some ideas, but there might be other things, because at some point I had to just stop and call it done. I couldn't throw every training exercise under the sun on that manual, but there might be a specific exercise that an individual dog I think could benefit from, or something cool that it's like, hey, here's another thing to have in your back pocket or in your bag of tricks like that you want to work with some dogs. So I would like to have ways to keep you guys kind of updated with more ideas or good training videos if they come across. And you know, obviously the email distribution list was there, but again, it was awkward, I found anyway.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right. Good ideas. How am I doing? Okay. So just kind of to segue, kind of as a warm up, as you're all getting ready to go back and start working with our Head Start dogs again, just kind of going over again some of the basics about the science and art of dog training. And so first, kind of talking about just general learning theory. Dogs and all animals learn in two ways. We tend to kind of categorize these. You know, the reality is both of these, it's muddier than that. Both of these things are always happening all the time. But in general, two types of learning are going on. One, we're learning by association, which is just pure what we call classical or respondent conditioning, where animals are determining what's safe, what's scary, what feels good, what feels bad, and what things in the environment kind of trigger those feelings. That's occurring all the time, every waking moment, and it's universal across species. We are also learning by consequences, which we refer to as operant conditioning. So what happens when I do a certain behavior? Does it result in something good, something I wanted, something I find reinforcing, or does it result in something that I would rather not happen, that I want to avoid, or that I find aversive or unpleasant? And all those things will influence kind of how we behave in the future. So classical conditioning, as I said, is just simply creating an association between two stimuli. Technical terms are a primary or unconditioned stimulus is something that an animal doesn't need to learn to like or dislike. So things like food or pain. A secondary or conditioned stimulus is something that the animal learns to react to based on its association with a primary stimulus. And this, again, is occurring all the time. The most famous example that we always kind of go back to is Pavlov's dogs. You know, Pavlov is the one who first kind of described this process because he noticed some things occurring in the dogs in his lab. Pavlov was not studying conditioning or psychology. He was, I believe, studying digestion. Though people are welcome to correct me on that if you know a lot about Pavlov. But, you know, food automatically triggers salivation in an animal. As they prepare to, you know, eat and digest it, we have a reflexive response to start to salivate. We don't need to learn to salivate in response to food. I started to notice that a bell that went off before the food was delivered started to trigger the salivation by food. So you were getting a reflexive kind of automatic response now in association with something that was kind of conditioned or learned. There's nothing magical about a bell that would salivate, but because it had been associated and predicted the primary stimulus so many times, now we're having the same response to the bell that we would have to food in the dogs. And we're doing that all the time, you know, having kind of unconscious, like reflexive responses to things simply because it's been associated with something good or something bad. So Skinner is the one who most famously talked about operant conditioning, which is more about how we learn about behaviors and what behaviors work or don't work. And this is about forming an association between a behavior and a consequence. These behaviors are triggered by some kind of antecedent in the environment. And so we can change behavior by changing either the antecedent or the consequence. And when we kind of categorize consequences, this is what's often called the 4 quadrants. And basically, again, things don't always fall into such nice, neat categories, but it gives us a general framework of how animals learn, how they change their behavior. So on this quadrant, when we use the terms positive or negative, we don't mean good or bad. There's no value about positive versus negative. What we're saying is positive means something is added, and negative means something is removed or taken away. And when we say reinforcement versus punishment, it's not about whether something's nice or if something's painful. Reinforcement is something that causes the behavior to increase in frequency, and punishment is something that results in a behavior decreasing in frequency. So when we talk about positive reinforcement, we're meaning that something is added, which will thereby increase behavior. And when we talk about positive punishment, we mean that something is added that will decrease the likelihood of the behavior. Negative reinforcement is removing something from the environment in order to increase the likelihood of a behavior. And negative punishment is removing something to decrease the behavior. It's a lot easier to think about these categories when you look at actual real life examples. So if I look at dog training, when a dog sits and is given a treat, therefore making it more likely that he'll sit in the future because he is anticipating or hoping for a treat, that's positive reinforcement. We've added the treat to increase the likelihood that sitting occurs. Alternately, if the handler shoves the dog's rear end down or applies pressure to the dog's butt until the dog sits on the ground, that would be an example of negative reinforcement. The pressure on the dog's rear end is removed when the dog sits. So we're trying to increase the likelihood of sitting by removing presumably kind of unpleasant stimuli of having a hand pressing against your butt. Positive punishment, dog jumps on a guest and gets kneed in the chest. So we're applying a knee to the chest to decrease the likelihood the dog will jump on the guest, versus the negative punishment scenario. Dog receives no attention and is ignored when they jump on the guest. So we are removing something that presumably the dog desires in order to decrease the likelihood that they'll jump. And, you know, it's kind of helpful to think about these categories when we're making training decisions, but also realize that things are never kind of solely in one or the other. We're always kind of, if we're positively reinforcing one thing, we are also negatively punishing another thing. So things don't fit neatly into those categories, but it does help us think about what's our goal. Are we giving something that the dog desires, is willing to work for? And are we trying to increase the behavior? Or are we trying to decrease it? And are we using something the dog finds unpleasant? And the reason that it does matter about at least having some familiarity and thinking about these quadrants and what quadrant we're working on is because of this famous quote that is generally attributed to Skinner, saying that Pavlov is always sitting on your shoulder. So as I said, both the classical and operant processes are happening simultaneously every moment we're alive, really. And so while every time a dog or any animal is learning how to behave, they're also learning how to feel about situations as well. So I'm not saying that some of these work and others don't. All four quadrants work. Behavior is shaped every day by our environment using all four quadrants. All of them will change behavior, but there's important issues to consider when we choose our methods. Because what we know is, because we're learning by association all the time, when we're using positive reinforcement, we are also creating good associations. Animal is learning that a certain behavior works. It also results in something they like. At the same time, they're building good associations with the environment, with the trainer, with the things that are occurring at the time, which for our overall behavioral health is the kind of big important thing we want to consider, is not just how the dog's behaving, but how they're feeling. Any of these other quadrants can result does result by definition in fallout. It doesn't matter if we would consider the stimuli to be painful or, you know, aversive. If it stops behavior, it's by definition aversive. If something's aversive, by definition, it's going to create some fallout in the form of fear, avoidance, reaction, etc. And so we're going to be creating a more negative emotional response. And because I don't want my training methods to be doing actual damage to my learners' behavioral health, and because I'm concerned about my own safety, I want to make sure that I'm staying as much in the positive reinforcement category as possible. So when we're thinking about how to make training decisions, some of you may have seen this before. This was written by one of my behavior heroes, Susan Friedman, it's been adopted by most training and behavior organizations, and it's referred to typically as the humane hierarchy, or the least invasive, minimally aversive method of behavior change. If any of you watched the playgroup video I did several weeks ago, we talked about Lima-based playgroups. This is the same model. So basically what we're saying is that if we're trying to change a learner's behavior, it's our responsibility as a trainer, as an educator, as a teacher, to make sure we are addressing all these little exits on the road first. So if we have a behavior concern, first thing we want to do is make sure that fundamental needs are being met. Their animal's health, their nutrition, their safety, their physical setting, their comfort. Basic survival needs, then everything that animal does is going to be targeted at getting those needs met. And until those needs are met, we can't really expect behavior to change. So it's kind of our responsibility. And, you know, in a shelter setting, of course, it's why it's important for us to do intake, 5-point veterinary exams, and, you know, provide appropriate nutrition and make sure that, you know, having standards for clean and comfortable kennels, make animals feel safe. That's kind of our first goal, to keep them both physically and behaviorally healthy. Assuming that all of those needs are met, then the next least invasive, minimally aversive method to change behavior is to look at what we call antecedent arrangements, or basically environmental management. So if we have a dog that is going crazy, walking out of the red zone, and they're housed in kennel 1, and so they have to walk by, you know, a dozen dogs just to get out to the path, and they're barking and lunging the whole time, maybe that behavior can be greatly modified simply by moving them down to kennel 15, so they don't have to be walking by a dozen dogs just to start their walk. And sometimes it's a change that simple and easy to make can greatly improve an animal's behavior. So kind of thinking about what are some things we can just change in the environment, whether other things that we do at the shelter would be like putting visual barriers up, sliding our licky mats into the kennel before we enter, so the dog's doing an incompatible behavior and just licking the floor as we walk on in, and they're not crowding the door, trying to set the stage up, you know, blocking the neighbor dogs on the inside. If we have a reactive dog that's talking trash to their neighbor and we take them out, if there's something we can just manipulate in the environment to set our animal up for success, then we want to do that. Beyond that, then we start talking about kind of training, behavior change, interventions. We want to focus on positive reinforcement, and I'm not going to get too much into the weeds about the difference between that and differential reinforcement of alternative behaviors, but essentially we're going to reinforce the behaviors that we want and prevent the reinforcement of things we don't want. We're not reinforce the things that we don't want. And Friedman's rules for moving up this ladder essentially are that we don't continue to go up to the next step unless we know we have exhausted every option at the previous one. And you'll notice that we've got speed bumps and yield signs and roadblocks and stop signs as we start to get into some of these more aversive things. So once we get past the differential reinforcement of alternative behaviors, you know, we've got a big caution sign. This is where we start to get in things like extinction, negative reinforcement, and negative punishment. And I think that in the positive training world, historically, and in reality, we all still do this. I mean, we all are kind of using these, whether we mean to or not. But in positive training, we used to have a lot of reliance also on negative punishment. So not just positive reinforcement, but removing reinforcement for stuff we don't want. And that is appropriate, but we have to remember that the process can be very frustrating. So if we have the dog that is jumping all over the walker when they walk into the kennel to leash them up, absolutely don't pay attention to that. The best thing we can do is, walk away, turn our back, remove attention, cross our arms, but that's likely not going to be enough. We need to catch something that we can reinforce instead. So 4 feet on the ground, sitting, pausing for a second, a less intense behavior. We need to kind of show the dog the path to get what they need. If we're simply just hoping for extinction, meaning eventually they stop trying that jumping behavior because it's no longer paying off, but they don't know how to get their needs met in a more appropriate way, we don't know what direction it's going to go. Animals get frustrated when they don't receive the reinforcement that they're expecting to happen, and frustration easily can turn into aggression, or they may begin trying other things we don't like any better. So now the dog that was jumping is now biting our coat sleeve or humping our leg or grabbing the leash. So while we may use negative punishment, meaning removing attention for the jumping, we need to remember that we also have a responsibility to go back and reinforce stuff we want, even if they're just slight approximations. Maybe it's not a beautiful, calm sit stay while we attach that leash, but they've put their feet on the floor for a nanosecond. We can drop some treats and reward that because it's better than what they were doing a second beforehand. And then, of course, positive punishment, where we're actually applying something that the dog doesn't like in order to try to stop a behavior, is kind of our last resort option. And I reserve those things for essentially emergencies. I feel like somebody's safety is imminently at risk, and being mindful about, again, still using the minimally aversive thing that is necessary, and then having a better plan immediately. This isn't my go-to training scenario. This is, okay, things went horribly wrong. I've got to get out of it somehow. There's a dog fight in the play group. We might have to pull out the water, but boy, now this dog's not going to the play group, or we've got to separate them, etc. We need to make a plan for where we're going beyond that, so we don't continue to fall back on positive punishment. And the thing I always like to stress is that this isn't just about being, nice and warm, fuzzy, rainbows and unicorns trainers. I deal primarily with dogs with serious behavior problems. And my number one concern is always, the behavioral health of the animal and safety. It's just important to realize that anytime we start going up this road past these stop signs and roadblocks, we're not only putting the animal's behavioral health at risk, we're putting our own physical safety at risk, because one of the ways to respond to aversives is through, reactivity, aggression, other distance increasing behaviors. So I want to avoid being bitten, and using positive punishment is dangerous. It is risky, which is why we want to encourage everyone to steer away from that. It might get you out of a situation in the moment, but you don't know what is going to happen down the line if that dog has started to have negative associations with the people walking them, with people in general, with the environment they're in, etc. So kind of taking this do no harm and keep ourselves safe is really the most effective way to train and change behavior. And the good news is we can change even very, very serious behaviors that way. The problem, like the dangerous kind of allure of some of these methods up here, is that punishment is reinforcing to the punisher. If we, yell at the dog, yank on their collar, shake a shaker can, and that behavior that was problematic stops, we are reinforced for that behavior as the handler. We think, oh, wow, that worked. The thing that was bothering me is no longer occurring. And so it can be really tempting and become a real slippery slope to fall back on those things. And it's why it's really important to be mindful and aware of, you know, our own choices and what we're doing and the impact it's having on the animal, because it does become a kind of dangerous road to go down when it feels like it's working, but then one day it doesn't. All right. Any questions? I know a lot of you have heard a lot of this before, but all right. So how do we actually apply that science to the dogs that we're working with? I think that's really where the art of it comes in. So when we're teaching behaviors, first thing we need to do is get the behavior. If we're using reinforcement, we need to have something that we can reinforce. So there are a number of ways to get behavior. One is to capture, which just means catch the animal naturally doing the behavior. Things that dogs do normally, like sitting or making eye contact or paying attention, can be really easy to capture. And the advantage is that it's very useful for these things that are just naturally offered frequently, or for natural behaviors that might be hard to elicit otherwise. An example I often give is I taught one of my dogs to sort of stretch out on cue before going into the agility ring by capturing it when he would wake up in the morning. I just was prepared to click and treat when he woke up and got out of bed and stretched. And then eventually I was able to put it on cue and ask him to do it kind of opportunistically. Things to consider about capturing are that you need to be kind of prepared. I had to be ready to wait for my dog, know when he was likely to stretch so that I could have the opportunity to mark and reward it. And I have to be observant. Sometimes you might capture unintended behaviors. If your dog happens to bark every time they sit or look at you, that might get built into the behavior. And of course, we can only really capture things that are in the normal repertoire of things dogs do. If we want something real fancy or complicated, they might be unlikely to just naturally offer that. So we can also sometimes use luring, which means using the food to lead the animal into a desired position. Luring can be a really fast way to get certain behaviors. I tend to lure downs, tend to lure like a spin behavior, because it can really jumpstart that process. But some considerations are to realize that the animal might just be following food. They're not really thinking about what they're doing. So it might actually slow down learning if they're not realizing that they just spun in a circle. They just thought they were following that treat. And you also need to get the food out of your hand after a few repetitions, or else food being present will become a cue for the behavior and stuck into this pattern of needing the food in your hand every single time. It's not that the dog is being stubborn or willful. They're like, well, this is the picture that you've always shown me. I need to see the cookie in your hand, and then you spin it around, and then I spin. That's what happens. So we need to fade that quickly, so we're not reliant on it. It gets harder to do over time if we've kept that food in our hand too long. And then the third kind of method for game behavior is shaping. So by that we mean rewarding successive approximations or baby steps that are on the path to the ultimate desired behavior that we wanted. The advantages of shaping are that it does build strong behaviors. I enjoy using it because it's very empowering for the learner. It really, you can see a fearful dog or a less confident dog really gain confidence when they are realizing like, oh, I do things and that affects the outcomes, and I can try more and it just keeps paying off. It's a really cool way to watch confidence build. I really think of it as an empowering way to teach an animal. And you can get really fancy, complicated behaviors that way that you would never be able to elicit via luring or capturing. Things like, you know, cute handstands off the wall or something can be easy to shape, pretty impossible to lure or capture. The considerations are that it does require a higher level of trainer skill, better observation skills, and mechanics. And we've got some exercises in the manual to help you guys practice those skills and the mechanics and timing. You guys, I'm sorry? Someone saying something. So just a review, you probably, often we're using clickers and Headstart, so this should all be review, but how does the dog know what behavior earned the reward? It helps us to use things called reward markers, which is just a tool that's through classical conditioning been associated with a primary reward like food or toys, so that it begins to be a secondary reinforcer because of that conditioned response. So example are clickers, the word yes, giving a thumbs up signal for a deaf dog. For deaf-blind dogs, we generally use a touch on a very specific part of the body. Anything that the animal can perceive can be used as a marker, and animals can learn different markers. They can learn a clicker, they can learn the word yes. They're pretty flexible in the number of associations they can make. And the marker indicates the behavior that we're looking for. It's not telling them what to do. That's what's really important. Think of it as a camera that's taking a snapshot of the behavior that we are trying to train in that moment, in that session. We are still gonna always follow it with a reward. It really needs to have a 1-to-1 ratio of you've heard a click or you've heard that magic yes, a treat's gonna be following. It will lose its value over time if it becomes a less consistent association. But that said, markers are really used when we're teaching a new behavior, so that they know when they're on the right path. It's not necessary to like continue clicking and treating every single time a dog sits for the rest of their life once they understand it and they have it on cue. That said, I think, well, I'll talk about shelter environments in a minute. Since I'm doing my typical thing and at risk of running over, I think I might skip the video examples, but you'll get this recording, these slides. You can go back and watch some of the video examples of shaping behavior, if that's okay with people. So once we have the animal realizing what behavior is the thing that's making the clicks and the treats happen in this particular training session, that's when we add a cue. We don't start saying words to the dog, despite what we watch the public do all the time. They don't magically know sit. So we don't start adding words until it's decently likely that they're probably gonna put their butt on the ground. They've learned that's what's getting paid. So the cue is the signal to perform the behavior. And I always tell people to use the $5 rule. My husband calls it the $20 rule. He's stricter than me. But when you'll bet $5 that, the next time, you've just given a reward, the next thing your dog is going to do is probably offer another sit because they've realized it's getting paid. Then you can start adding a cue. Dogs usually learn physical cues first because often they derive naturally out of what we were training. If we were luring a sit, often a natural physical cue tends to be something that looked like that luring behavior. Or if we're luring it down, again, maybe a gesture to the ground kind of naturally comes out of what we were normally doing to elicit the behavior. If we're teaching a hand target, the physical cue is just part of the behavior. Hands presented, come touch it with your nose. So those physical cues often come naturally from what we were doing. So verbal cues are usually the more challenging ones to train most dogs. The secret to doing it is that you need to give that verbal cue right before you expect the dog to perform the behavior and kind of prior to any other cues. So if my dog's following a gesture to the floor and lying down, and I want to teach them a verbal cue for down, I would say down, gesture to the floor, mark and reward. And those two phases, I would say, are kind of they're the easy part. They're probably the fun part. Dogs can generally learn new behaviors and get them on cue with an impressive short amount of time. The real work then is the generalization and proofing. So can the animal perform these behaviors in different contexts, different settings, when some element gets harder? And so as we're going through that process, if things are getting more challenging, we might need to back up and reduce criteria. So we might need upper rate of reinforcement, reward for kind of easier things first. We have to talk about 3Ds, meaning duration, distance, and distraction. So if I've just added more distraction into the environment and I'm working on eye contact, I might have to go with pretty short duration at first of eye contact before I ask for longer sustained eye contact or a longer stay if something exciting is going on. So oh, if something's gotten hard, we need to scale back how hard we're making other things. And one thing I like people to keep in mind in Headstart and with our staff is another quote from my often quoted Susan Friedman, is effortful to train for situations you don't normally have to cope with. And keep that in mind when you're working with shelter dogs. Generalization is hard for even our pet dogs living in very predictable environments. And in a shelter, again, they're dealing with other challenges, and generalization is hard. Every day is kind of a new day. Their kennels might change. The staff person coming in and feeding and cleaning rotates. The people are taking them out on their walks, the timing of their walks, the routes of their walks, all these things are changing all the time. What they're running into and encountering out there, you know, especially now as trees are being planted and construction equipment's working on the parking lot and parts of the trail are blocked off. Every day is kind of new. So really to expect a shelter dog to become super fluent in generalized behaviors is going to be high expectations. So don't worry about perfect fluency. You know, feel free in Headstart to stay in early stages, reinforce even basic behaviors and small approximations. We can certainly make progress and build, but you know, I think every now and then I've had Headstarters sort of be like, having expectations that dogs should do all these behaviors without treats entirely because they've been in Headstart for 3 weeks. And, you know, I think give these guys a break. This is a very, very challenging environment to learn and work in and change behavior in. So we want to continue to challenge them, but also realize that it's not the same as training a dog that's living in a very predictable, safe environment like a home. So how do we deal when the dog does not do the correct thing we were hoping for, aiming for? Plan A is to be proactive and set the dog up for success. So, you know, managing the environment, splitting the behaviors, meaning if I'm working on eye contact and my dog's not offering that, I'll reward for just orienting towards me and not the environment, looking towards me, looking towards my chest, looking towards my face. I'm not going to wait for like long sustained eye contact if there's tons of distractions in the environment or my animal's getting confused. I can calmly interrupt if necessary. You know, often we'll say things like, oh, ignore bad behavior. Well, you know, I might ignore something or just wait for a different option if what the dog's doing is very benign and not dangerous and not going to be reinforced. If they're just looking around, I'm working on eye contact and they're staring, gazing about, I might just calmly wait until their eyes turn back towards me and then mark and reward. But I'm not going to just stand there and wait if they're lunging and barking at something in the environment. But I can calmly interrupt when behaviors are dangerous or destructive or self-rewarding. And realizing that removing a reinforcement is enough. Behavior can totally be changed by the removal and addition of reinforcement. There's not need for additional correction on top of it. Then I want to change the environment. My dog's having problems working in a certain area. I want to go somewhere where they can learn easier, or I can lower my criteria. Again, maybe I'm rewarding for a lower duration of eye contact or rewarding for just orientation, you know, my general direction at first. Or we can use what we call behavioral momentum. So ask for highly likely behavior. And a lot of times our Headstart dogs have, you know, their favorites, things they're really good at. Go back and ask for something that they are likely to get right that you can reinforce and then continue. I really like training hand targets partially for this very reason, because there's lots of cool things you can do with hand targeting, but also it can become just such a reliable behavior because it's so easy for them to rehearse and practice and be reinforced for, that if things are falling apart, a simple hand target is usually with my own dogs, with client dogs, shelter dogs. I might ask for a hand target because that gets them back like, oh, I know the answer to that one. I can do that. I recognize that. Okay, cool. Now you're back in the game. Now we can continue working on something a little bit harder or something new. And we might need to increase the rate of reinforcement or the value of what we're using as the reinforcer. Dogs, the animal, the learner decides what's reinforcing. We don't. So judging and labeling dogs because they only like high value treats, I mean, you know, chocolate is obviously kind of our widely considered reinforcer for human behavior. You know, the kind of stereotypical thing is, you know, we'll reward somebody with chocolate. Not particularly reinforcing for me. You know, my husband would be a big reinforcer. Chocolate is kind of like on the middle of the list for me, even though it's, you know, most people would consider it a very desirable thing, and our dogs are the same way. Just because you think that you've got the super expensive fancy treats that you brought from the store snuck in to use with Head Start dogs, if they would rather be reinforced with hot dogs or cheese or the crummy red treats, then, you know, go with what your learner is going to be reinforced by. If things still aren't working, keeping in mind that basic physiological needs must be met. Obviously, at the shelter, we're taking care of health and food, but, you know, if a dog came in poor condition, emaciated, etc., they might need some time to settle in and get healthy and get to a place where they're feeling good enough to learn. The big thing, though, in a shelter environment is that need for safety. A lot of our dogs kind of take some time and or continue to struggle to feel safe, and that's likely to influence a lot of their behavior and often probably a lot of the reasons that they might be in Head Start. Probably most of these dogs where safety continues to be a concern in their minds are going to be the dogs that you guys are going to be working with. So keep in mind, if these needs aren't met, their behavior is going to be about getting them met. And so your first goal is going to be find a way that they can start to feel safe. They're not necessarily in a place that they need to learn complicated tricks. I think I talked about most of these other things. Oh, behavior is continuing. Also, you might need to think about, are there other ways that the dog's getting reinforcement for that behavior? So petting the dog that's jumping on you, or just giving them any attention. The dog that leaps on their walker as they walk in the kennel, and the walker starts pushing and yelling no and flailing around. Plenty of dogs find that more reinforcing than punishing, because they're still getting attention and social interaction.
You know, Angela, can I ask you one about that very point? I've noticed with those licky mats, sometimes the dog's is jumping up and down in the kennel and barking. And so the first thing that somebody does is throw in a licky mat full of cheese. And then of course the dog stops and stands still, and then the person goes in. But I always kind of marvel at that. Like, is that the first thing you want to do with a dog that's kind of bouncing off the walls, is to throw them a bunch of a licky mat with cheese?
I mean, the idea of the licky mat versus going and spraying the Kong cheese is that because you can deliver it from under the door, you technically can.
Oh, it totally works. Yeah.
Pause, wait for 4 feet on the floor, fling it in there.
Yeah.
And so then you've reinforced 4 feet on the floor.
Oh.
That causes the licky mat to be slid in, and then they're doing incompatible behavior. You've managed the environment so you can go in and click the leash. So, I mean, that's the ideal way to work with it. You know, if the average dog walker is not as sophisticated with that, maybe, I think the risk of them, maybe they end up reinforcing some ugly kennel behavior. But I guess I'd rather them err on that side than get clobbered going in. If the dog's going to do worse behavior when they walk in without the licky mat, then I think being at least preventing the rehearsal of that stuff is important. And again, it's just, you know, trying to always increase communication and build people in training and reminding, like, hey, why don't you wait till they do something a little bit better? And that said, for some dogs, I mean, it depends how extreme it is too. If I have a dog that, like, their feet don't end up on the floor for a nanosecond ever, then it's okay to sometimes reinforce. Sometimes it's okay to present food like a reinforcer once, like the first one, like, okay, you're doing ugliness. Maybe I'm going to throw some food on the floor just so I can get you to stop with ugliness. And now your feet are on the floor. So now maybe I can toss a few more treats. I can toss a few more treats and I can slide this licky mat in. So sometimes I absolutely will use an initial food reward just to get them to do something other than the barking, you know, leaping, climbing the wall.
It's a distraction.
Yeah,
I mean,
you know, to build something like they're not offering anything other than feet up on the door. then okay, I'll toss one cookie in for that.
Yeah, because I've seen that, and when I saw this point that you just made, and I sometimes have hesitated to throw the licky mat in when they're going bananas.
Yeah. And I think it also comes back to also thinking about what is the motivation for the behavior. If it's the just jump in and Barkins worked, so that's what the dog's doing. Then I could have some more expectations of like, I want to shape that to more appropriate kennel behavior. But if I have a dog that, if I'm a 7:30 a.m. walker and they're a red circle dog and the jumping is motivated by, oh my gosh, I have to go to the back. The bags haven't been out since 4:30. I'm always a little more lax.
Right.
Work is like, I can't think of
Yeah.
this. So
Yeah.
you might also consider, is something else going on for that dog, and asking for a sit or something is going to be a lot to ask. And I think that kind of goes back to some of these thinking about, is there some other function and some other need that we need to meet for that dog? So the classic dog trainer answer is it depends. But yeah, ideally licky mats in the perfect scenario would be slid in at the moment that feet have hit the ground, not at the moment that feet are levitating. All right. And just a few kind of reminders, because I know that working with challenging dogs can be hard, especially when you're coming in for 2 hours and doing one after the other. Take breaks, reach out for help, and understand that the cool thing about behavior is that it's modifiable and that reinforcement works. And that's, what I find rewarding and reinforcing about my job is watching dogs make progress and watching behavior change. But it's also important to realize that not everything can be quote unquote fixed. And some things are going to be so serious and severe that we may not be able to make significant enough improvement for that animal to be safe in the community. And I know that Headstart, as far as volunteers, applies to deal with that reality more than maybe your average walker. And I just want to say that it's not, your efforts are still not wasted. They're still important. And sometimes we do everything we can, and we can't always fix the things we wish we could fix, but it's not a failure on anyone's part. I think what matters is that we're trying and we're putting the effort in, and it mattered for that animal when we are, but don't get discouraged or feel like something doesn't work just because we weren't able to do quite enough for that individual when it happens. All right. Any other questions? Cool. Well, it's been fun kind of seeing your faces, hearing your voices. I've seen some of you around the shelter, but not all of you since we reopened. But I'm excited. Kind of nice reconnecting. I was like, Headstart's always one of my kind of beloved programs because I was a Head Starter when I was a volunteer, and I see the benefits that it does for the dogs, and it's really cool that we have the ability to kind of offer this to help the behavioral health of our dogs. So I'm excited that you'll be getting going again. I hope that you like my chat. Has something. I hope that the changes to the forums, to the resources, to the makeup of the team, I hope that works for you guys. Really, we're trying to make this successful for the dogs and for you. That's the motivation behind any changes, is trying to give people choice and flexibility so you guys get the most out of your experience and can kind of pick and choose to some degree what you like doing best. So let me know if that's working for you guys, if you have other ideas of things that would work. I think that the manual is done by, at least I'm going to consider it done because I have to at some point, or else I just keep fidgeting with it. So as long as everybody else that's kind of involved feels good about it, I anticipate that will be sent out to you guys, very soon. Hopefully even tomorrow. I can't really speak for Ton, but we'll see. And so that'll be available probably also on the the volunteer resource page. This was recorded, so if you want to go back to see what my answer was to a certain question or what I said about a certain issue, you'll have the link to be able to pull that up, and we'll also be able to share it with the other Head Starters who couldn't join tonight, but who are still planning on coming back. We are hoping that everybody does tune in and watch it before going back, so they're up to date on all of the stuff we discussed, and hopefully can be kind of on the same page. So yeah, I'll be interested to, oh, when we'll be starting again? I mean, I think we can start as soon as, you know, Teresa and I were kind of saying like, hey, we can start next week. So I don't know if it works for Dawn. Maybe it'll take her a little longer to, you know, shuffle everything together. But I mean, I anticipate that as soon as we logistically see who wants to come back and what days you're still on, it'll be any day now, I would think. You guys, I think Teresa and I can probably, at least from our part, put some dogs in the binder.
Yeah.
That would be great. Then we can, even if we're not like official Head Start thing, you know, we can start to like work with them, you know,
Right.
while we're there, you know.
Yeah.
We're going back out for sure. Like it's pretty full there right now, so we've got lots of options to choose from.
Yeah, I think earlier on, Ton was asking, and we would say, you know, very early on, dogs were rotating fast. It was crazy, and I was like, well, we don't have a dog here long enough to put in a Head Start, but that's changed now, so it's time. We're ready. So I'll be glad to have you guys back doing that. So yeah, I think we'll start putting dogs in the binder. You guys can check that, and then I'm sure Ton will be reaching out as far as, you know, official schedules and assignments and signing up, but I anticipate we should be ready to get it rolling again.
Great.
That sounds great, Angela. Thanks.
Thank you.
Yep, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, if I